Welcome everyone. Hello. And today we are having a webinar on recent advances in fertility management hosted by Medicover Fertility. So this is a testing time for all of us in COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. But whatever the situation is, the academics must go on. The sharing of information should continue. So till the time participants are logging in, I'll take this time to brief you about Medicover Fertility. So Medicover Fertility is the leading European fertility chain with its presence in more than 13 countries, including India, and has an overall 24 plus years of experience in treating subfertile couples. All over across, it has more than 3,000 clinics, and in India only, it has more than 16 clinics. And the first clinic of South India is Medicover Fertility Hyderabad. So at Hyderabad Center, we follow all international guidelines, ISHRE and ASRM, evidence-based medicine, and try to do the best treatment for our patients. And in last 2 years, we have been a great success rate and a great start. So now, and in Medicover, we have also introduced some of the latest things like RI Witness technology, which is already there in Delhi Center and will be soon introducing it in Hyderabad also. And now, since I think we can move on to the webinar, and the first topic today is ovarian rejuvenation and endometrial regeneration. And our eminent speaker for the day is Dr. Manjula Anagani, ma'am. Ma'am does not need any introduction. She is an institution. She's an authority in gynae laparoscopy, and she has received Padma Shri, a prestigious Padma Shri award for her contribution in the field of medicine. She also holds a Guinness Book record for removing maximum number of fibroids, and she is the first doctor who has done treated a rare case of endometrial aplasia using PRP and stem cell technique. Her list of achievement and awards is long, and we can go on and on. But overall, I like to say with my experience, with my personal experience, that she's a wonderful human being, a great teacher who believes in sharing the knowledge. And currently she's the director and head of the department, Medical Women and Child Hospital. So over to Manjula, ma'am.
Just say a snail can, if I just have to say, if a snail can grow back its head and a lizard can grow back its tail, why can't a human being grow back the finger? So from this came the whole concept of regenerative medicine. So regenerative medicine, is it a fact? Start your video, start my video. Oh, I think there's been a technical glitch and then we are starting back again. So let me start telling about this regenerative medicine, how it started. So when the questions start coming about how the other animals can regrow heads, tails, legs, and most of the bodies, and if a snail can grow back its head, lizard can get back its tail, why can't a human being grow back the finger? That's how the whole thing starts, and the regenerative medicine about, is it a fact or a fiction? So regenerative medicine replaces or regenerates and restores the almost normal function. So there are several types of therapies we talk about in regenerative medicine, the first being stem cell therapies and cellular therapies of PRP, tissue engineering, gene therapy. So we are looking at the new innovative therapies and or even cure when it needs to that. So it's a game changer. It can fully heal the damaged tissue. So it gives us a hope to the new zone of the area where we can put ourselves. So it's advances for many development in cellular biology and immunology, which will take us there. So how do we characterize regenerative medicine? Regenerative medicine is, according to Mayo, is an innovative medical therapy that will enable us to repair, replace, restore, and regenerate damaged or diseased cells. So it's where the technology meets with the science. And then tools and procedure we use is tissue engineering, and technology is cell-based, that is natural and synthetic scaffolds and 3D printing and chip technology. So it's an interdisciplinary field where engineering is mixing with the material science. So how do world look at it? World looks at it whether it can help us in human tissues, cellular therapy, gene therapy, combination products, stimulators of endogenous repairs, and xenoplantation. So areas where the regenerative medicine works is artificial organs. Artificial bladders are already in place. Tissue engineering, biomaterials, scaffolds for the trachea, etc., wherever the tissue can grow. Then the cellular therapy in OBGYN, this is where we are looking at, that is use of stem cell and growth factors, where we can utilize it for our improving the functioning of the ovary and the endometrium. So we can also look at the enhancement, regeneration of the tissues and organ, and clinical trials. Many trials are on way about it. So what are the stem cells? They're undifferentiated cells. Many potential scientific uses, often referred to as regenerative and reparative. They both are equally actually spoken as the same, but they are not, because the other things which are there in stem cell which can be used is therapeutic cloning, gene therapy, cancer research, and basic research. We do have embryonic stem cell which has gone out of the book, but adult stem cells are there because, but we have to remember there are limited tissues available like bone marrow, muscle, brain, placental cord, and the baby teeth. So what is the huge difference between embryonic and adult stem cell? Embryonic stem cell last and last and last, and that is totipotent, and we know the source. It's coming from the embryos, from the abortion, or from the IVF centers. But immune rejection can theoretically happen, but ethical issues. Are we playing God? Where does the life begin? These questions led to development of utilization of the adult stem cell, where it is multi or pluripotent, because there's a stem cell line which is needed to develop into another stem cell line. So unknown source, limited numbers, less likely because we are going to use autologous. Immune rejection is less likely because HLA typing is also done, but hard to locate, but no ethical issues there. So like I said, there is a cell line lineage which is important. Luckily for us, in OBGYN, it is the bone marrow stem lineage is the same as the ovary and the endometrial stem lineage. So harvesting and culturing them is actually a challenge which we have to look at, and potential of these is for various things like bone, adipose, from wherever we have to take, we can utilize it, but biopharmaceutical and wherever we need it. So stem cell certified treatments are bone marrow, which is already in place, umbilical cord blood, which is already in place. Rest all are innovative treatments. They're still being experience-based and evidence-based is still yet to come. So autologous activated adult mesenchymal cells, or the bone marrow cells, or the adipose tissue, which even the plastic surgeons use. And the future is about skin-derived induced pluripotent stem cell, which we have to wait and then see. Coming from a buccal mucosa or a skin, we can develop whatever we want. So future is yet to come. Here we have made so many innovative cell-based therapy in Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's, spinal cord, stroke, so many things. Gene therapy, therapeutic cloning, and cancer. So what do we do in autologous stem cell? We take the stem cell from either the iliac crest or the posterior superior iliac spine, but usually from the iliac crest, and where the orthopedic colleagues of ours or the hematologists or the pathologists will help us in taking it out. And in gynecology, it has been used in various strategies in ovarian cancer, and umbilical cord blood has been used for malignancy. Fetal-maternal cell traffic is a known thing. Chimera is a known thing. And stem cells are also used for prenatal transplantations also. In regenerative gynecology, it has been used for SUI, bladder reconstruction, pelvic floor, endometrium, fistula, thalassemias, and muscular dystrophies, and all that. In reproductive gynecology, this is a topic for us today where we are seeing where it can be utilized, that is neooogenesis, endometrial regeneration, and spermatogenesis. In this reproductive biology, it has started way back in 2012, 2013, when people have realized that ovarian stem cells are there, which can actually, when put into the new ovary, which is not functioning, can still forget. So with all these studies which has come up every time, a technique, technology, everything keeps changing. This has been our first publication which has come with this, and this is how it started. Where in endometrium, there is no endometrium with the ovaries being normal, and hysteroscopy said there's absolutely no endometrial lining, that is aplasia with thing. That's when this bone marrow has been taken. using the bone marrow aspiration needle from the iliac crest. And out of, if you take 40 ml of the bone marrow, then you would get a 4 cc of the thing. So for endometrium, we would just need about 1 cc. So we had started off with 20 cc of bone marrow, and that's how the whole progress has started. After that, it was the first time when we did, we were like, okay, cross our fingers, let us see how it works. Our technique evolved a lot after that. And the ultrasound, we had put it, and within next cycle, we could see a normal undulating functioning endometrium, which was thick enough that she started having normal menstrual cycle. And we had a good progress from then, which we started way back in 2014. So benefits of adult stem cell is easy to obtain. Autologous, so no ethical issues, the limitless potentially in supply. It can use, like, you know, they can use their own thing, so there's no question of rejection. Politically neutral, and therefore not offensive to majority interest group in it. But limitations, yes, if the patient is already having a genetic disorder, the same thing can still go to the offspring that we are talking, and maintenance of culture is difficult if it's not used in the same time. So these are the challenges which can be faced: how to control stem cell, marker identification, finding right expansion, different differentiation, different scaffolding required according to what we need. That's when, with all this debate coming up, the thing, unethical tissues coming up, we thought of, do we have an alternate option? We can use both in limited things, but to have a better outcomes. So what is PRP? The stem cell, we know it's a totipotent cell which can take whichever form we want to do, and then it can continuously renew, and it can replace the lost cells by dividing and differentiating into the cell type which we need. PRP is already a differentiated cell, means it is in the fate of a platelet. There's limited number of cell division. Doesn't directly replace the host cell, but it stimulates the protein-rich growth factors and the stem cell chemoattractants. So what is it? Like if you just have, imagine you have an open wound, there will be inflammatory cells which come there, they form the edema. As the healing continues, there's an yellowish layer which is formed. It is this layer which will act like a scaffold, and the layer underneath will form as a normal skin layer again. That is a regenerating capacity in this layer. Using the same principle, the injection of these growth factors to allow the growth happening is what we do. How does PRP work actually? So it acts on the healing capable cells. That is, it increases their number, that is mitogenesis, stimulates the angiogenesis. This part of angiogenesis is very essential for endometrial regeneration and the ovarian rejuvenation. So platelets have alpha granules which also secrete the growth factors. So it acts on the PDGF, fibroblast growth factor, epithelial growth factor, VEGF, and TGF-beta. So all these growth factors will then act. So how do we do? It's such a simple thing because we are using then and there. We should not be using commercial thing when we are looking at this because it makes a huge difference in the outcome. So withdraw, centrifuge, you take the Buffy cord, and this is the normal cell blood will have 6% platelets, but PRP is 94% of the platelets, and the tissue healing enhancement will be 10 lakh platelets per microliter. So it is this concentration of platelets in 5 ml, which is a working definition. So there are so many controversies about why in our case PRP worked, in our case PRP did not work, because this is what happens. If we have to use a pure platelet-rich plasma and not the leukocyte platelet-rich or platelet-rich fibrin or anything like that. So according to the DEPA classification, what is most important for the best outcomes is the dose of injected platelets we use very high. Second, efficiency is the device which we use to get the high device efficiency is very important to recover the platelets more than 90%. Purity of PRP should be very pure, more than 90%. And activation prop, just taking a PRP and putting is not important. You should just before injecting, you need to activate it with calcium chloride. See that it is not clotted using the autologous thrombin. So using PRP, Scaphenodis has started this thing, and that's when this is our preliminary study which was published in 2017. Here our inclusions were, primary or secondary amenorrhea more than 33 months, infertile women more than 35, low ovarian reserve, low AMH, premature ovarian failure more than 35 FSH, poor ovarian reserve more than 12, normal karyotype and presence of at least one ovary, and then normal other tests. So we take about 10 to 20 ml of prevenous blood withdrawn, and then 2 to 4 ml of PRP is made, and then we do it. So how it is done? It is done in the first immediate 7th to 11th day, where we can do both the infertility worker plus injecting this into it. So I will exactly show you the video that is very important. So you can see it's a streak ovary which we can see. So we direct into the cortex of the ovary. You can see the PRP being injected towards the ovarian vessel and also into the infundibulopelvic. So it is this activation where the injector of it into the cortex, which makes a huge difference. It improves the volume of the ovary and also activates the cortex. So it is, this procedure is totally technique sensitive. So when we give PRP and stem cell also, it's the same technique where we induce both sides on a thing. So when we are doing into endometrium, we give subendometrial, multiple injections, multiple punches are made in the subendometrial area, and then PRP and stem cells both are then injected into it due to just the suction capacity of the uterus and the tree layer muscles which are there. It just takes up into subendometrial layer where the neoangiogenesis happens and the endometrial layer forms. So what we need to understand, it is technique sensitive, and the technique you need to follow is important to get the best outcome. So we check the endometrial thickness before, and zone 3 blood flow is noted, and ovarian blood flow is noted, and hormones like FSH, LH, AMH are measured on day 2 of period before and the day 2 of cycles post procedure and after 3 months. So we have initially done only with PRP before we had the guts to start stem cell plus PRP. Till 2018, we had 80 cases of pure PRP cases where we had all these cases of hypogonadism cases, streak ovary, primary ovarian failure, infertility, thin endometrium, Asherman's and TB, and the septal resection. And we could see the tremendous response of 35 patients in ET improvement, only 15 patients, it was the same, but the blood supply has improved even in out of that 16 patient to 13 patients. So that blood cell zone in the zone 3 was made a huge importance, and FSH improvement was seen in 43%. But unfortunately, with PRP, the results were waning within 1 to 2 years of it. That's when we started doing PRP plus stem cell. With only PRP, we had 9 pregnancies, 6 had full-term pregnancies, and 3 had abortions. So this is the twins which we had. And doing all this, what we have understood is that along with these deliveries, we also had the menopausal syndrome, which has improved a lot in these women. So when we started doing stem cell plus PRP, the same technique, and we had all these cases where we had done in a post-menopausal lady also, and directly into the ovaries, endometrium, and both. These are the improvement. We had best improvements were seen both in the FSH and the ovarian Doppler within the thing. So at the end of it, it is the pregnancies which matter. Till now, we had 1 delivery post using this test tube baby, post IVF, and ongoing pregnancies right now are 4 all IVF. Again, 1 spontaneous pregnancy had missed abortion. So total we had 5 plus 1, 6 pregnancies which we had out of these 36 pregnancy cases, which we used both the stem cell plus the PRP. So we are waiting for the other things to happen because there's a huge difference in the FSH levels which we are looking at, and the oocyte retrieval and the quality of the oocytes which we could retrieve. Patients needed second sitting in 4 of our cases. In 1 case, we had to do 3 times. From initially it was only PRP, then again only PRP, then we went into the stem cell plus PRP where the FSH came down to 8, and then this is the lady who is right now pregnant and who's continuing pregnancy. Then 1 lady which we had to do twice, and first with only the PRP, next with stem cell with PRP who has delivered. So 4 cases we had to repeat. Safety issues, contraindications to PRP will be anything as with any other blood products which we are doing, like bleeding disorders or any infections or sepsis. And can it cause carcinogenesis is a $1 million question which people ask. There are concerns, but no, because we are using autologous. Unless there is this thing with the stem cell of that particular bone marrow, we are not going to have any problem with the stem cell of that autologous. With PRP, it can never cause concern because it's already altered into a platelet. It's only causing growth cell improvement. So significant success we had in our studies, and which patients had breast recess. Yes, some where the ovarian calcifications are there. These are the cases which we have seen that they do not do well much with our thing. So I think the calcification is one of the places where our results were not very great. That the lowest also are seen with more nearer to the menopause. So age does have a significant. 35 years with POF had better results than 50 years ladies. So main consideration is the method itself. It's a technique insensitive. The anticoagulation that the blood sample does not clot, and then just correct time of activation before instilling, we give the calcium chloride, and the location is equally important, that is giving it into the cortex and stimulating by the injecting into it. Just we do know in PCOS also, when we just stimulate the cortex, it makes a huge difference to the neoangiogenesis. So within 4 months, it will take the oocytes to develop. So remember, don't be in a hurry. We usually tell them to wait for 3 months to get the best result and then go in for IVF treatment. Is it a solution for low AMH? Yes, we do see that rather than just the AMH, which can be marginally increased, it is the number of the collected eggs and the quality quality of egg, which has changed a lot after we started doing this. So in the 3 to, like I said, 4 cases we had to do second attempt, and which case needs it's the very case-based thing. So with zero AFC also, yes, because we are looking at primordial follicles and not the preantral follicles. If at all, this thing we did have patients who are like streak ovaries developing who are having a primordial follicle developing the oocyte. So whatever the quality of oocyte, we did have good quality oocytes that are giving us good enough embryos. So all my IVF colleagues are very happy with this, and we do get a lot of cases coming from there. So this is our short experience with the oocyte rejuvenation, which has gone for our final publication. So which we are looking at is patients who are suffering for POF, low AMH, high FSH, poor oocyte quality. We definitely want to have their own biological child. Oocyte donation is always there, but I think we should give the option of this to them. And endometrial regeneration definitely again gives hope for women who are looking at the option of surrogacy. So these are all the burning topics which are there, but imagine a world where a POF patient can have a child of their own. So there is a single light of science, and to shine it anywhere is to shine it everywhere. That is what we are here at Medicover. So I'm happy to take you all along this thing. And now I think we want the eminent panel which has to come up onto the thing. So I would request, we would now go on to the recent advances in the ART. I request all the panelists to come on board. Please, Dr. Alia, Dr. Nancy, and Dr. Rahul. Can I see them on my board?
Yes.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, Dr. Alia.
Hi, hi ma'am.
Hi.
So how are you all? I would like to see all of you on my board. Can somebody make it happen so that I can understand? So like I say, ART is an ever-changing phenomenon. Recent advances keep coming. Things which are of past can become present today, which are present today can become past tomorrow. So everything keeps changing, and a matter of concern almost always is poor responders. That's where patients are affected, patients are there. So what are the evidences of it? Who do you call them as poor responders, and what are the current use of adjuvants in the poor responders? What all do you give? Do you dump them with all those things, or you look at pick one thing and then do it? Dr. Alia, you can start it off, and then I think I want a word of Dr. Nancy also on this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manjula. Your talk was very enlightening, and it really showed a lot of hope for us, IVF specialists. Now, coming to the question of poor responders, we have 1/3 of our people who are going for infertility as a poor responders. And according to the ISHRE, there are the guidelines that any persons who have less than 2 of this can be called as poor responders, like advanced stage, more than 35, number of follicles more than 5, and low AMH, like below 1.1 or 0.8. So taking them in mind, we can say that there are 2 categories according to Poseidon, that advanced age who are above 35 and below 35, who are young people who are also not responding well to our controlled ovarian stimulation. So when coming to the Poseidon 4, that advanced stage, they have decreased in their primordial follicles and the oocyte quality because of the advanced stage, where the follicles have adverse effects on the nucleus, resulting in aneuploids and abnormal spindle changes, and on the cytoplasm also, where there is a decrease in the mitochondria and abnormal ATP also. So because of that, we are having these people. So and then coming to the poor responders, are a grade 3 Poseidon group, 3 poor responders. They are the young people who can have decreased AMH and low AFC, because due to intrinsic factors or extrinsic factors. The intrinsic factors could be due to immunology or post-ovarian surgeries, or excessive endometriosis, or deep pelvic disease or adhesions, and high BMI, and people who smoke heavily. And there is also a thing like during the there is a spindle alteration in the fetal life. There could be an aberration, apoptosis of the germ cell, resulting in a poor responders. So these people, and they are the receptors, FSHR receptors, LH receptors, and there are certain people where there is the abnormality in the folliculogenesis from the primordial to antral follicles. So they also will be considered as a poor responders, and there could be a mutations in their genes, so resulting in pure. So these are the people who have a challenge for the IVF people, because in spite of so much of sea change in the treatment, in the gonadotropins, in the protocols and the adjuvants and all this, we are only able to give them a compromised treatment. So coming to the adjuvants, what you were asking, like there are many adjuvants which we can prescribe them, and they are to be given like previous to the IVF cycle. It can't be like you give it along the IVF cycle. It has to be given before. So there are the DHEA, transdermal testosterone growth hormone, recombinant LH, CoQ10, and many are there. So these are all mimic, like if you take DHEA, it increases the insulin growth factor 1, which promotes the folliculogenesis in the ovary, so that we get good quality oocytes, good maturation happens, and then metaphase 2 oocytes. So these are all, this DHEA has to be given as 75 milligrams per day for at least minimum of 6 weeks or 2 months. So then coming to the testosterone transdermal, it also, we find there's a lot of testosterone androgens in the follicular fluid. So DHEA could be a precursor for this testosterone, and it helps in the steroid folliculogenesis by giving us good follicles and maturation, and good, even it acts on the endometrial receptivity also. So that also can be given as 10 mg transdermal to be given where there is non-hairy part of the body, like on stomach or inner thigh. And this is supposed to be given for at least prior to the cycle for 21 days. But the latest study says that it has to be given at least for 60 days. Only then we can think about improving it. And then comes the CoQ10, and after the transdermal gel, we have this growth hormone. Growth hormone also acts on the granulosa cells, thereby increasing the quality of the folliculogenesis and the metaphase 2 for oocytes and all this. These are all interlinked, so they all act on the finally on the folliculogenesis only. Then we have the ecosprin, which can increase the blood supply to this. That also can be given. And sildenafil, and all these things can be given. Then coming to the recombinant LH, which has to be added to the advanced people, is that it increases, it maintains androgens in the folliculogenesis, thereby we might get good oocytes and all these things. So these all have to be, and finally when we are thinking about starting on the advanced female, or on starting on them, the very good thing is priming the cycle before we start an IVF with estradiol. Like 4 mg can be given from day 21, so that there is a synchronization and good growth of cohort follicles. So these are the things, and they can be given simultaneously before we start an IVF cycle.
Thank you, Dr. Alia. But Dr. Nancy, I would like to ask you one question. Apart from these other things, if you are using, or the second point, what I want to know is, for you, we go undergoing all these things so that the patient can have her own baby, because even though she's a poor responder, is important, or do you think you would like to suggest a oocyte donor? Dr. Nancy, I would like your response.
Couple should have their own biological child. That is more important. Even if we have to use anything, it is like a biological child is always important. And before going to oocyte donation, we have to explore all the options. And only if we are not able to achieve a good embryo, then we can go ahead with the oocyte donation.
Right. So how many times would you try with, after giving all this, like Dr. Alia said, you would be giving at least, we do know that ovarian cycle or even the sperm cycle is about 75 days to 3 months, right? So these all have to be given before or after. You need to wait for 3 months, and then you have taken 1 cycle, your 2 cycles. So when do you actually tell them, we have tried 1 cycle, 2 cycles, and then you tell them that we'll go for oocyte donor, or when do you actually try?
In this, we have to look at the categories. Like, as madam already told about poor POR, we had 2 categories. First, in 2011, they came with the Bologna criteria, where they included a very heterogeneous group of poor responders, where the criteria was advanced is more than 40 years, any previous cycle poor response where they obtained less than 4 follicles, and the third was abnormal reserve marker like AMH between 0.5 to 1.2 and AFC between 5 to 7. But this was such a heterogeneous group that we cannot prognosticate the patient. So for prognosticating the patient and for knowing who are those candidates on whom we can try hard
more.
Own embryo, we came onto a Positron criteria, that is 2016. Now, if we look at the Positron criteria, we have 4 groups in this. One group, like 1 and 2, they are with adequate ovarian reserve.
Right.
And 2, 1 is younger population with adequate ovarian reserve, 2 is older population. Then we have 3 and 4, which are poor ovarian reserve. In this also, the Positron 3 is young population with poor ovarian reserve. So this 1 and 2 Positron has a good prognosis. These are the patient group where we have to work harder. We know we can get a good embryos and we can try all these adjuvants. Again, in Positron 3, where we have young patients with inadequate ovarian reserve because they are young. So in younger population, we can get good embryos. So this is again the third group where we can use all these adjuvants and we can try. And then coming to the Positron 4, where we know, yes, we can take an early decision for oocyte donation because they are older population and with a poor ovarian reserve. So depending on their age, their ovarian reserve markers, we have to individualize how many cycles we can give them. But yes, if we have already tried, and like we say in recurrent implantation failure and all, when we have transferred good quality 4 embryos in 2 or 3 cycles.
So you mean to say it is a patient's choice? Patient would say enough is enough, then you would stop. Okay.
Yes.
Right. So going to the next question, I would just like to answer this one question. There's a question which has come from Dr. Mohan Gupta, who says till now about the ovarian rejuvenation. This is what I would be answering. So not a standard treatment. So do you think time has come to give this an option? Yes. For all the poor responders, or even when the AMH is low or the ovarian follicles are not there, please give this as an option to them. Major risk, yes, the same risk as infertility laparoscopy is always there. That's it, nothing more than that. So we do it in the laparoscopy. We plan it around 6th day to 11th day as it is, so that we are doing for the infertility evaluation. And when we do a FSH, LH and AMH and E2 on the day 2, we already know that they're having poor respondents. So as a part of the counseling, that happens. And then we do this. And success rates is very, very good. Most of my IVF specialists already know that. And success rates have been so much more once we started the stem cell rather than only with PRP. So we didn't have to do any second time stem cell injection like we had to do with the PRP, where we had to do twice. Anyway, the next question is to Dr. Rahul.
Yes.
So we cannot leave the male aside. So in infertility, it is tali to bajna hai ki dono haath ka chahiye. It cannot be from the same hands. So it has to be tali from both hands. So with males, there's been a lot of adjuvants which are given. We have been talking about adjuvants for responders. With males, everybody gives vitamin A, that is coenzyme Q10 and all that. So what is your say on anti-estrogen? Do they really work? And how long to use and what dosage? When you say adjuvants, I want you to talk not only about antioxidants. I want you to tell us more about the testosterone and all these things which you give.
Madam, as you said, treating male partner is very important, and it should start from the beginning. When you start seeing a female partner, you have to start treatment for the male partner. My way of treating is whenever I see a patient with oligospermia, I start with hormonal evaluation. I don't start with antioxidants, because antioxidants, they have certain role, but it is limited without treating the underlying cause. Most of these males with underlying cause, we have to correct that underlying cause, and these antioxidants should help them with this after correcting the underlying cause. The most common cause what we have seen in Indian scenario is infection. and second one is hypogonadism. So if there is infection, there is no point in giving antioxidants. They might decrease ROAs in these patients, but they may not cure properly. So we have to treat these infections. And second common cause, what we have seen is hypogonadism. That means most probably testosterone. Again, this is lifestyle-induced testosterone. Most of these males, they sit continuously, they don't exercise, and that is a common cause. And when testosterone is directly related to sperm production. So what I do is I do FSH testosterone. If FSH is on the higher side, that means this patient is going towards testicular failure. If FSH is borderline or less than 8, these are the patients who will respond with our antioxidant therapy or hormonal treatment. And testosterone level, what I see is 3.5 nanograms per deciliter. That is my cutoff. If it is less than 3.5, I put them on either clomiphene citrate or HCG injections. That has to be corrected, and along with antioxidants. So now clomiphene citrate, again, there are some doubts. Most of us, even testicular failure patients, we put them on clomiphene citrate, which is totally incorrect. Only when FSH is on the lower side, it's better to start clomiphene citrate, because we see a lot of prescriptions where we see clomiphene citrate is the first drug for male infertility. That is not the case. Only in cases of hypogonadism with low FSH, clomiphene citrate will work.
Right.
And in cases of hypogonadism, because of abnormal TE ratio, because of obesity, then we have to put them on anastrozole or letrozole. Then I put them on antioxidants. Coming to, and otherwise, if both are normal, if I want to increase testosterone safely, only way is giving HCG injections. My way of giving injections is weekly once HCG 5000 international units, weekly once for 4 weeks. Then I repeat testosterone. If it is in the normal range, then I stop HCG injections. Coming to antioxidants, there are so many combinations. There are no proper studies about these antioxidant dosages. But in general, 200 milligrams of coenzyme Q10, astaxanthin, lycopene, if patient is affordable. If patient is not affordable, we can even give simple vitamin E and vitamin C for these males. But in my experience, antioxidants will help, because we don't call them as antioxidants now. We call them as micronutrients. And each micronutrient has some role in sperm production or sperm maturation. I generally give for 5 months before giving up.
Okay. So all these cases of oligospermia, do you do a biopsy of the testis? No, right?
No, only in azoospermia.
Only in azoospermia. Right. There's a question which is coming from Dr. Deakeny from UK. And he's asked you that these men with sperm problems, when they result in a male child, what are the chances of this child inheriting the same sperm problem?
25 to 50%.
25 to 50.
If it is genetic. If it is genetic.
That's what. Because as a male, you do not do all the genetic tests of the male, except for at the most Y deletion at the most. Do you do a genetic analysis with a routine patient? No,
man. Generally, I leave it to fertility centers, because most of the males, we don't know whether they are really interested in fertility ART treatment or not. We don't know. Because most of these tests are expensive. Generally, what I do is, once I see a azoospermic patient, then I'll refer them to a fertility center, and where we can, they will follow up, they do genetic testing. Then we do testicular biopsies.
Other than that, you really will, and the incidence of this thing would be 25 to 30%, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. It was quite explanatory, I'm sure, but I think it's the quality of the sperm which is helped with antioxidant rather than the quantity. And for the quantity, he would definitely, I think, depending on the FSH, he'll make a call. And he still did not tell us the dose of the mestrolone or any testosterone directly, will he give or not?
Testosterone, my ideal range is 3.5 nanograms per deciliter.
Okay.
So I start with HCG 5000 injections.
Only HCG. You would never give direct this thing because it will inhibit the FSH. Is that the thing?
The direct testosterone is contraindicated in male.
Yeah, that is the point I wanted you to tell, because direct testosterone can actually go and then have a negative effect on the FSH. So that's important. Okay, thank you, Dr. Rahul. Next.
Ma'am, for genetic testing also, it is recommended by SRM that when sperm count, it is severe oligospermia, the count is less than 5 million, then we can do a karyotyping for male.
Okay.
Azoospermia, when it is azoospermia, then we have to test for Y chromosome microdeletion and check for A, B, and C.
Azoospermia, Dr. Nancy, everybody agrees. We are talking about oligospermia. Like you said, I think severe is one thing that you can do. But the second point I wanted to know is the conformation, in the sense, is not just the count, it is the quality of the sperm and the tail and the acrosome and the reaction of it and the tail and the head thing. Do that make into the norm? If it's less than 3, more than 3% is normal. Normal forms is normal. So if it is less than 3%, do you do a genetic analysis? If the count is normal.
No, ma'am. It is only if the count is less than 5 million, severe oligospermia, yet severe oligoastinospermia, then only we go for the testing.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nancy. Okay, Nancy, the question is now for you. Role of double stimulation in poor responders. So do you believe in it? You don't believe in it?
Ma'am, this is a very recent thing which has come. Initially, we thought that follicular recruitment only happened on the day 2 of the cycle, but now there are many theories which are suggesting multiple waves of folliculogenesis. That means the folliculogenesis happens in the proliferative phase and also in the luteal phase. So this stimulation is this double stimulation concept is based on that multiple waves of folliculogenesis. And now there are studies which have shown that embryo quality and the oocyte quality which we get from the luteal phase is also equivalent to the embryo quality of the proliferative phase. So suppose if we have less time, or if in a poor responder we want more embryos in the cycle, then we can go ahead with the double stimulation. In double stimulation, we start the stimulation from the second day of cycle. We trigger the patient with GnRH agonist. We don't give HCG trigger to these patients. And after GnRH agonist trigger, 36 hours later, we go ahead and collect the follicles, collect the oocytes, and after 5 days, we can start the stimulation again so that we can have more embryos in the same cycle. And although I think it is very promising and is going to stay with us, but the evidences are lacking right now. So we can just tell it is just in the clinical research. It can be used only in the context of clinical research and not a routine practice.
But I feel if this is there, especially in these times where nuclear families less time and people coming from out of India and having shorter time, this will have a huge role. I want Dr.
And also for oncology patient, madam, where we have
before chemotherapy.
Can start random stimulation. It can be started randomly also. So we can start a random stimulation in these candidates, go ahead with the double stimulation, collect the embryos, and then they can go and start their treatment.
Next, I would like to ask Dr. Alia any more explanations. What is her take on this double stimulation? Before that, I just want to say there's a question which has come to us about, do you advise the karyotyping for premature ovarian failure cases? Yes, we do as the routine karyotyping. Dr. Alia.
Yes, ma'am. See, in the dual stimulation, the dual stimulation, of course, I agree with Nancy saying that in oncology patients, it can be randomly used. And because we have seen this, Poseidon has changed its thing about poor responders, so suboptimal response. So making use of the 3 waves in the single ovarian cycle. So, but the number of gonadotropins used in a single cycle are more, and there are chances of failure in the luteal phase stimulation. So there are more chances, and according to the SWOT analysis, where they say about the strengths and the weakness and the threats and the opportunities and the threats, we are still under study, because the strengths are that it can be done in a single cycle. So the patient friendly it is. You might get a more number of oocytes, where we can have a proper single euploid blastocyst. From that, we can aim at getting on it. And the weaknesses is that it has to be given a lot more of gonadotropins are used, and the whole and in the first strength, the one more thing to be added is there is no difference in the oocytes collected in the follicular phase and in the luteal phase. That is one good thing about the dual stimulation. But in the weakness that it has no RCTs or no studies have been given about it till now. And then the opportunities that we have a lot to study about it, and we know that we can make use of them in future about the poor responders. And the threats are that like no gynecological, obstetrical, or neonatal studies have come out resulting in the response of
effect
this.
Of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Alia. I think we'll again go back to our male compatriot, that is Dr. Rahul. What are the predictors for improvement in male infertility? In the sense, on what basis do you look at and say that, okay, I will start off this and this has improved and all? Or do you simultaneously start the pregnancy treatment while you're already, while the patient is on these medicines?
Okay. My predictors are testicular size and FSH.
Okay.
FSH and testicular size, and my cutoff. Generally, most of the diagnostic centers, they give clinical cutoff of FSH as 14 or 18, but I take FSH as 8. There is a study which says 7.9 is the ideal cutoff. If it is more than 8, that means we have to suspect this patient is going towards testicular failure. So if it is less than 7.9, then it's very likely that this patient will improve with medication. And same thing with testicular size. If there is small testicular size, then again he will be a poor responder.
Okay, that's good. That's a way of saying. So you're looking at even the clinically the size, the quality. I always believe in that when we do the PRP and stem cell also, the volume of the ovary is the one which is the first improvement, shows when it starts improving and the circulation starts improving. So the same thing holds true even with male infertility. You feel the size of the testis makes a huge impact on the outcomes, that it is functioning. Okay, thank you, Dr. Rahul. So I think it has been answered by Dr. Alia, but Dr. Nancy, your take on dose of gonadotropin in poor responders?
Ma'am, there were many studies where they have used higher doses also, but now they are saying a dose more than 150 will increase the ovarian response. But anyway, anything more than 300 is not going to give us any added advantage because the ovarian reserve is limited. The ovarian, the FSH receptors will be saturated. So any dose increment more than 300 is not going to help us.
Do you believe in this extended low dose regimen, either by recombinant or by regular gonadotropin, of starting with 450 and continuing it and then increasing slowly to maximum 150?
Ma'am, we can start with that, with extended low dose regime. Depends on the follicular sizes what we are getting. Till the time we are able to achieve a follicular size of 17 mm, we can go ahead with the stimulation. And this milder stimulation where we start with the clomiphene and the gonadotropins.
Yes.
Initially, it came with a lot of, but now there are evidences which are suggesting that the clomiphene with gonadotropin or gonadotropin alone gives us the same results.
Okay. So you would, but still a low dose long regime is something for poor responders which you would suggest?
No, ma'am. Evidence is not suggesting that. We'll go with the conventional stimulation. Okay. And also in poor responder, we have seen that the the oocyte collection should also be done at around 17-18 millimeter because they tend to have a premature rupture also.
Okay, Dr. Alia, do you agree with Dr. Nancy, or you would have another say on this?
Yeah, I agree, because the more gonadotropins also don't seem to help in anywhere, because there were studies which said that 150 was also same as 300. We never got more oocytes when we have used higher doses. But here, one thing I can say is, in this poor responders aged people, we can go for pooling of the oocytes, where we can use 2-3 cycles, where we can pool them up when we get a number of 10, so that we can think about getting one good blast from that and transfer it. So that will help the patients better. I feel so.
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Rahul, we'll back to you with again. And there's a question which is coming to you from Dr. Dekani again. I want you to answer this. Thank you for an educative presentation. And if the testicular size is very small, we can resort to TSAB, where we can retrieve sperm in 86%. That is what he says. So do you do a lot of TSAB for these patients where it is small, even though other reports are normal and low oligospermia is the only thing? And we all know that TSA, yes, you do have to we can retrieve. Yes, there is a chance that there is a 25 to 50% chance of any genetic problem which is going to think. So your comment on this, Dr. Rahul?
I think decision has to be given to the patient couple.
Right.
So we have to explain this. If the couple is ready to take that risk, then we have to go with, then they can have their biological child.
Yeah.
And regarding the TISA, if it is only azoospermia, we do testicular TISA. If it is oligospermia, there is no point in doing TISA.
Yes, that we agree. So you do take only the TISA or only when there is a azoospermia after doing the biopsy, and it rules out the other causes for it, right?
Other causes, nowadays, according to guidelines, we are not supposed to do diagnostic testicular biopsies.
Yes. In the same thing, you would do a TISA, right?
TISA, and if sperms are there, then we have to freeze those.
Freeze them. Fantastic. That is what I wanted, because this is the same bit you can actually take out the sperms which are near, even if you have one sperm. And there's another question which I wanted: varicocele surgery versus ICSI, because most of the time people have this this thing on their mind saying that we do want. There are two extremes. We do have people who say we don't want any surgery on our testes or anything because it will affect the potency. The second thing, they don't want IVF, so they want the surgery. So what do you prefer in a patient with OATS with varicocele? Both oligospermia, there is a oligospermia, and varicocele is grade 3 or grade 4. Yes. So you're sure it is a cause for the thing?
Yes. This is always controversial issue. No, my point is, if patient's FSH is in the normal range, that means this patient will definitely improve after varicocele surgery.
Right.
I don't operate in with very high FSH because the response rate is very low in these patients.
You mean to say the temperature? You mean to say the temperature has already affected the production?
Yes.
Okay.
So now, if FSH is on the lower side, it's always better to do a varicocele surgery, improve, and at least take them to upgrade the procedure to IUI level. We can always do it at least in 30 to 40% patients. We can do that.
So your counseling matters the most. And explaining
the second thing, now in the era of DNA fragmentation, now if most of these patients with grade 3 or grade 4 varicocele will have high DNA fragmentation. So if DNA fragmentation is high, then if you directly take them for IVF procedure, then outcome is very poor. Most of the times we see very poor quality embryos or early pregnancy loss. In those patients, doing a varicocele surgery may not improve sperm count, but it may improve sperm quality.
So you do wait for 3 months after the surgery, right?
Minimum 3 months.
Yeah, that's what, minimum of 3 months. That's one thing which I wanted. Now the question is to Dr. Alia. Dr. Alia, madam, indications for laser, everywhere, everybody, a patient goes and every center starts telling that, oh, we have laser assisted hatching in our center. So what is your take? Is it something, is it necessary, and do we have to do it? Dr. Alia.
Yeah. This is the latest thing happening. It was there previously also, but it is usually seen that when there are 2 cycles of failed implantation, we can suggest a laser to them. Or when there is advanced stage people whose zonas are thick, they also can be advised for them. And one more thing is where there is poor prognosis of the fertilization, like slow growth of the cells and a lot of fragmentation, they have a thick zona. So in such cases, you can promote the laser. And finally, in the frozen and thawed people, where the zona is hardened, you can promote this. But how far this has helped in achieving implantation has to be studied still. But we think, because we have come a sea changes in that, right from preparing a small window to acidic triode solution, now coming up to infrared beams being focused. So this is one thing which we can advise when we don't know what's the additional thing for the implantation, to help implantation.
Yeah, the studies have not yet proven that miscarriage rates are similar and multiple pregnancy rates are a little higher with this. So like you said, I think advanced maternal age, and we have tried so many times, repeated implantation failure, thickened zona, we can do it. Okay, Dr. Rahul, what is your experience in PRP or stem cell? This is a question which has been coming on board to me. Then I said, I wanted, when we talk about it, and which has a great future, when we started doing it first, there was already people doing it for male infertility. So what is your take on it? Or you think it is much more easier to do TISA, so it is easy, so we don't have to worry about it?
Madam, in my experience, I worked with 2 teams. I think in 2017, I called you once before
I remember.
started.
I put it out.
So I did with 2 teams.
Yeah.
One team I did 7 cases and other team 4 cases.
Yeah.
In 2 different years, one in 2018 and one in 2019. We have selected only azoospermic patients.
Right.
So azoospermic patients, particularly maturation arrest patients, are hypospermatogenesis where we couldn't get sperm in TISA procedure.
Right.
So my result is very poor. None of them got sperm because at least 5 of them we did TISA before, and 7 of them were fresh azoospermic patients without TISA. After this, we waited for almost 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And in all these patients, we couldn't get sperm. And later we couldn't get. Our results are very bad. So then I discussed with the company again. Then they said we are supposed to do this for only oligospermic patients, not azoospermic patients.
Okay.
So now they say according to that, since it is an expensive thing, most of the oligospermic patients, they may not opt for this treatment.
Not
Instead
necessary.
of spending on this, better to spend on IVF process.
True. So my take on it, like comparing just because it's a woman and versus, see what we found when we were doing is it is very technique sensitive, like I always keep telling, even when you have something. So we have to do, maybe the technique can be little altered with multiple, because we are stimulating the angiogenesis there and we're putting the cells which will produce the growth factors there, that is PRP, or sometimes a stem cell which can change into it, that is if you have a primordial cell at least, we're not looking at preantral cell. So maybe here if it's completely destroyed, that it is not having any primordial cell, it doesn't come out well. The second thing is if a lot of fibrosis is there and the actual cortex part of it is not touched. I think technique, if you can change and try, probably, but I have no this thing with the male infertility, so I cannot talk about it because we have not done. And there were studies which came from Chennai which said yes, there were good results. That's the reason.
I have seen those papers.
Yeah, that is the reason I was asking you. Thank you, Dr. Rahul. I'm going on to Dr. Nancy this time. So embryo glue. So apart from next comes after hatching ho gaya, usko dalne ki koshish kare, still wo implant nahi hoga. So then what are we talking about when we talk about all the glues everywhere? We try about this, that glue, this glue and all that. So embryo glue, does it have the improve outcomes?
First, ma'am, embryo glue is a hyaluronic acid medium.
Yes, same thing.
The embryo in that which helps in addition of the embryo to the endometrium. So there are many studies when we look at the normal response patient where the endometrium is good, the embryo is good, we don't need it, and there was no added advantage of using embryo glue. However, in a study carried out, RCT was there where they have used this embryo glue in a subset of population with recurrent implantation failure. There they have shown some added advantage, but that was not statistically significant. So we need more RCTs about the embryo glue. And in our practice, what we are doing, we are using it only for the patients who have previous 2 or 3 failed IVF cycles, not routinely. It should not be used in a routine practice with a good embryo and a good endometrium.
Right, because we still don't know the effect of this hyaluronase and everything and the glue on the baby which comes out.
Embryo,
so I think laser hatching and the embryo glue should be the resort after recurrent implantation failure. When you don't know the reason, that's when you should be using it. So what is PGT and what is its current role in IVF? Dr. Alia, Madam, Dr. Alia, Madam. So what is your take on PGT? I think we are almost coming to the end. It's already 4 o'clock, but I definitely want to know this about the pre-implantation genetic testing. Everybody wants to use it for their own purposes, but what is your take on that?
Pre-genetic, it's done in cases because this is something newer for the IVF. We can always try on it. For the people or the parents who had repeated failures or recurrent pregnancy loss or abortions, for those people this is of some use. And for the people who have single gene malformation, or there are genes which can be identified before transferring the embryo. So here the pre-genetic testing is you wait for the blast and then take out a biopsy and send it for testing. So we can see if it is a single gene, you can avoid those embryos and transfer only the normal embryos. This is usually, we can see it in cases of cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy or hemophilial cases. These you can always do it. And it is, then again, there is other genes which we can measure out the diagnosis of it, and then see for the structural rearrangement or relocation. There also we can do this PGT test. And when we can also do in the case of monogene abnormalities, where we can select them and then we can transfer only the normal embryos, so that the parents would have a normal children. This is of some use to patients who have a leukemic child, where they don't have a hematopoietic transplant. It is difficult for them to have a hematopoietic transplant. So they want to have number of children who can match with their child. So here also, this is one place where it's very useful, where we can select them for HDL and select the, only those embryos we can transfer into the mother, so she can have he can have a transplant, and the cord blood can also be transfused to the leukemic child.
So, thank you, Dr. Alia. But Dr. Nancy, what is your take on day 3 versus day 5, and what are the limitations of this PGT?
Ma'am, the first limitation of PGT is like a lot of mosaic embryos we see. So, and we have seen the rate of mosaicism is more in day 3 embryos than in day 5 embryos. So when PGT came very early, but in 2007, when RCTs were done, they showed no advantages of PGT in improving the pregnancy rate. And the limitation of those studies were, they have done a biopsy on day 3 embryo and they have used FISH technique. So when we are using FISH technique, and we know that FISH technique can identify only 5 to 14 sets of chromosomes. So routinely in India also, when we do FISH, we use only 13, 18, 21, X and Y. These 5 chromosomes are mostly examined. So we miss more than 20 to 30% anomalies involving the other chromosome sets. So in 2007, they just told that PGT is out, there's no added advantage. But after the discovery of CGS, like comprehensive chromosomal screening and the NGS, that is next generation sequencing, and quantitative PCR and single nucleotide polymerase, when these techniques have come and we have moved to day 5 embryo biopsy, and in day 5 mosaicism may be there, but the incidence of mosaic embryos are very less at day 5 embryos. And also with these newer techniques, we can do a comprehensive analysis of all the chromosome pairs and the screening the embryos. So nowadays with this technique, obviously we have PGT-A and PGT-M. PGT-A is like screening, and PGT-M where we are targeting a particular anomalies like sickle cell anemia or any inherited anomalies. So PGT-M is always there, but when we talk about PGT-A only, then we can just say with the CGS and coming of NGS sequencing, and where we can now do we can take a biopsy on day 5 and do a transfer on day 6 embryo in the fresh cycle. This has a role to play in patients with previous
okay, Dr. Nancy, there's a question which has come from Dr. Dikini, which is a very fair question. What he says is, you should not be throwing the aneuploid this thing blast also. The reason being that even though if all the embryos are aneuploid also, they do have pregnancy rates even though it is less. So what is your take on it? You would still, if all the embryos you have taken, you've made, and then you've done a day 5 thing, and all are aneuploids. So do you still go ahead and put it back into the embryo transplant, or do you throw them?
Ma'am, self-correction of embryo is seen.
Yes.
So to counsel the patient properly, we have to tell them about all the risks, and if the patient is agreeing, we can do a transfer.
Yeah, thank you. That was the thing, because even though it can cause pregnancy, the chances of pregnancy, even though it is less, you should go ahead and do the embryo transfer. The reason being self-correction will be there and chances are still there. Dr. Alia, can fresh ET be done after day 5 embryo biopsy?
We have to see, ma'am, because the embryo has been sent for investigation. It has to be only after we getting it back we can do it. I think.
You can still do it.
I'm not very sure about
it. Okay. Your take, Dr. Nancy?
Ma'am, if it depends on the technique. Suppose if you are using CGS or NGS, like quantitative PCR results can be available within 4 hours. With CGS, we array chromosomal microarray, we get the reports within 24 hours. So we can take a biopsy on day 5 and do a transfer on day 6.
Okay. And I think we had a very good comprehensive panel discussion with a fantastic panelists here, but I just want to say that there is always a dilemma of aneuploidy screening, especially when it comes to low responders, because whatever we get are very low, very few, and on the top of it, if you are doing, if anything goes wrong, how they would be taking it. So I would like to thank Dr. Alia, Dr. Nancy, and Dr. Rahul for being the best panelist ever I can handle. And I would like to thank that Medicover for giving this opportunity. Over to you, Dr. Nancy.
Ma'am, I think we can thank you so much, ma'am, for a wonderful moderation and making this panel very interesting. And I think, ma'am, you have taken all
Thank you so much, Manjula. Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you, Rahul.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Rahul sir. Thank you, Alia ma'am. And ma'am, you have taken we have taken almost all the questions.
Yes.
There's one more question, ma'am, which I like to ask is,
yes,
should we refer to a patient to an ART center? On this.
Yes. Can you just repeat exactly what exactly you want me to answer?
When should we refer a patient to an ART center?
When do you, as a person, see what I do in our practice, definitely, you know that I believe that dog has to do dog's work, donkey has to do donkey's work. I don't believe in doing all the things just because you are a gynecologist, you want to put your fingers in everything. So yes, we do all the cases wherever, like Dr. Rahul, how he has told it, all the treatable causes should be treated before. Just because a patient of infertility comes, chalo aa jao, IVF kar do, ART kar do, that is something which I have been seeing in the latest trend, which should change. First, they have to be evaluated comprehensively, case-to-case basis. Should not be put it in the same overall this thing as everybody does it. No, it cannot be a stamp, cut, paste treatment for anybody. Evaluate properly. And then please treat them with, definitely go step out a step in the sense, don't jump to IVF without doing hysteroscopy, laparoscopy and seeing what exactly is the problem going on. It might be a small polyp near the fallopian tube which is obstructing it, flap valve mechanism also. So just the doing a hysterolaparoscopy and the mental stress coming down, people do become pregnant. So do all these things. If they still don't become pregnant, then definitely I would send. And during this process of evaluation, if the FSH and all, like I said, it needs anything, any correction at every level, in the sense in the ovarian level, tubal level, uterine level, cervical level, we will take care. If still they don't conceive, and they would send. And anybody more than 35 years, I would not waste their time. I would just do a simple 3 months or 4 months with us, and then they will send that. So, but yes, your team, your nexus is very, very important. You should be having an ethical group of like-minded practitioners in the ART and centers, and the regular obstetrician gynecologist who does that. That is the most important. And the patient confidence in us, and the patient should have the same equal amount of confidence in that doctor which they are meeting. And then again, the patient should come back to us. That is what we need. Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, dear delegates.
So now I'd like to thank all the participants who have participated in this. And with this, any more questions? I don't think there is any more question for any panelist or for Manjula ma'am. So we have taken all the questions, and now we will be ending this.
So Nancy, thank you so much. And Rahul, shall we end it?
So we'll end it?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
There is
Questions
no
more.